Good morning and thanks for joining us. This is the Morning News on WSBA, hour number 3. It's your turn to make the call. I'm Gary Sutton.
And I'm Chris Tyler.
WSBA news time is 8:40. There was an article out, and by the way, if you want to continue to call and grade the president on leadership, we would invite you to do that at 1-800-357-0910. But there was an article out by Roger Simon today, who writes for Pajamas Media, and he entitled the argument, "The income inequality, the biggest lie of all." And in the past few days, the president has attempted to kind of change the subject of public discourse from healthcare to income inequality, which he has dubbed the defining challenge of our time. And he goes through this, Simon goes through this article and basically says the president has not paid much attention to this problem for the first 5 years of his administration, even with African-American unemployment through the roof and the middle class disappearing from American economic life. But all of a sudden, it's the defining economic problem, defining challenge of our time. And in the article down here I was reading, and it's really interesting, he said the fight for income inequality is and has been for a long time the defining lie of modern liberalism. This is not to say that income inequality doesn't exist. Of course it does. But what liberalism does is pretend to do something about it, to whine and complain about it in order to ensure the support of the poor, the semi-poor, and minority groups, while doing nothing that changes the substance of their inequality in any permanent way.
Right.
And the key there is permanent. Indeed, it often exacerbates it. So then he makes this statement, and this is the one that I really want you to think about. Consciously or unconsciously, these liberals of the present day may actually want the lower classes to remain the lower classes. After all, they bettered themselves. They might leave the Democratic fold. That wouldn't do.
Oh, interesting.
So the system goes on.
Interesting.
So in essence, by making not fundamental changes, because you can make this argument. Most cities are under Democratic control. You look around the country at urban areas, and you can say what you want about the makeup or anything else, but they are under Democratic control. How have they done in the last 70 years if we still have some of the same problems we had back in the 1950s and 60s, and we're still talking about the same problems today? So have they made any permanent solutions to better that situation, again, when they were elected to do so? And if not, why not? Because there may just be, do this, and I've said this about Jesse Jackson and the Reverend Sharpton several times. Once you don't have people who you deem to be underrepresented or somehow are getting the short shrift in society, once you don't have victims anymore, you're out of a gig.
Pretty much.
You are out of a job.
Yeah.
So
they want people to remain dependent.
And that's the big question. Do they want people to remain dependent? I'm talking about modern day liberalism. In other words, as long as you have victims and you can talk about it. And the bit of hypocrisy about this, who's talking about that? People who are already wealthy, well off to do. The George Soroses of the world, the Al Gores of the world, the President Obamas of the world. They are the ones, they're not going to be hurting. So all of a sudden they magnanimously reach down. But what are they also doing? You look, for example, at immigration. And Republicans are bad about this too. Don't get me wrong. The idea that somehow we're going to allow people to come into the country illegally. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as citizens of this country. Okay? Do they have the same rights coming into the country, or are they coming in to be just shy of slavery? Are they coming in to be our lower class that does the work while we wink and nod in the other direction and say, oh, we're so great, we're bringing these people in? What about the quality of their lives? That's something that's not talked about often in this argument. So I think Simon is on to something here. Consciously or unconsciously, these liberals may actually want the lower classes to remain the lower classes. And the very fact that many of these liberals talk about society in terms of classes tells you where their thought process is. How about the people who don't talk about society in terms of classes, but talk about society in terms of American citizens and the whole look at it?
And opportunities.
And here's the other point. These inequalities, and this is one of the things that's often intimated, and the president talks about this. There's this thought, there's perception out there that somehow this inequality between the wealthy and the poor, even between the middle class and the poor, is somehow due to the fact that the wealthy and the middle class, or people out there who have somehow achieved some level of comfort or success, they're doing that at the expense of the poor. That the poor don't have that same chance to do it. And yet we continue to see story after story of people who have risen up through ranks of lower class, if you look at it that way, or just not having it very good to start with, and have still found success in the society. So is it really that? or is that the biggest lie being visited on the American people? 1-800-357-0910. You also can grade the president on leadership this hour. Let's go to Stephen in New York. Stephen, you're next up. Go ahead. It's your turn to make the call, Stephen.
Hi, Gary.
Good morning, Stephen.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Great to have you aboard.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm looking out the window here, and the parking lot's covered with ice. That's really not good. And it's probably George Bush's fault. But
how would you grade this president?
Well, if I was a manager and I was doing hiring for a manager training program, I would start him out. I give him he could work for free for a week. Even he does have a good resume. I let him work free for a week, and then I'd probably start him at minimum wage.
Here's a question. When you say he has a good resume, what's his resume in terms of letting us know that he was going to be a good leader?
Well, it looks good on paper, but it doesn't really work.
See, I'm not even sure it looks good on paper. I mean, if you say, okay, I was a professor, I was
president of the United States, it's worth something.
Well, okay, but you're now okay. You're saying up to the present day. Okay, I'm with you now. That's what I was trying to kind of figure out, Stephen. Thank you for your call. Good thought. Yeah, you're president of the United States. That's a good resume on paper. But then you say, okay, now, while you've been in that particular position, what have you done? Well, I've had, let's see, Benghazi. I've had an IRS scandal.
Yeah.
I've had the NSA
right.
Out there. Let's see, I've gone after states because they were trying to carry out the immigration laws through my Justice Department. The Defense of Marriage Act, I wouldn't stand up and defend that. I allow sanctuary cities to occur in the United States. I've been trying to take prisoners out of Cuba for a number of years, but haven't been able to do that. I've got an Obamacare program that was passed back in 2009 that so far is not really working out all that well. Might later on, but isn't working out well to this point. Yeah. That's my signature piece of legislation, by the way. Yeah. I don't know. So a great point there, Stephen, about the resume. Let's get Howard in New Park very quickly. Howard, have about 45 seconds with you to go before we have a hard break. Go ahead.
Sure. We had a service organization down here that we were asked to support. It was a family life center about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And they had this marvelous program for the underprivileged. But when we asked them, when do you see you achieve your goal, they said, we have no intention of working ourselves out of a job. And this is typical liberalism. No poor folks, no Jesse Jackson. He'd be out of work overnight.
Yeah, I mean it's a shakedown. I mean if you really look at these whole things, they're shakedowns for a temporary period of time, and you know that's the travesty of the whole thing, Howard. That is the travesty of the whole thing, that we have people who say, okay, we're going to give you just enough to make sure you keep on supporting us, but you're also going to continue to clamor about you need more. And why do you need more? Because those evil people above you are taking away from you, and it's their fault that you're not doing better. Your thoughts about grading the president, 1-800-357-0910, or maybe you'd like to disagree and you say, that's not what present-day liberalism is. Change our minds. We were analyzing this income equality, the biggest lie of all, written by Roger Simon of Pajamas Media, and I put it out this morning, by the way, on my Twitter, at Gary G. Sutton, and also you'll see it on my Facebook page. But one of the things he says in this, he says, so on the surface, all this income inequality chatter is nothing more than hypocrisy. That homage that vice pays to virtue, as a French philosopher once said. But it's really worse, says Simon. It's cynical and mean because all these so-called liberal solutions to poverty, solutions that have been tried hundreds of times since the Great Society, and probably before to no avail, suck the energy from the room, befuddle the media and the body politic, and make it impossible for other methods to be tried, as with the Rand Paul idea in Detroit. I don't know if you've heard about that recently, but what Paul is proposing in Detroit to get it out of bankruptcy, for example, is to, I just lost my place, is to lower taxes in the city drastically, suspend what many believe are excessive environmental and labor regulations to jumpstart business. And he says, naturally, our friends on the left are appalled. I'd like to see his idea really be given a chance to change the atmosphere that has pervaded our culture for decades, creating a climate of bitterness that seems to be growing. One of the worst aspects of the perpetual liberal solution to the inequality problem is that it increases a person's dependency on government. How many times we talked about that?
Yep.
Something that is even worse for the individual emotionally than it is for the society economically. Let's go to Bob in Hanover very quickly. I'm sure disagrees with me on this. Good morning, Bob. Welcome to the Morning News.
Hi, good morning, guys.
Good morning, Bob.
The first thing is the income inequality exists, right?
It does to some degree. Yeah, it does exist. Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yes, okay. And the other thing is...
But it doesn't exist because I'm doing well, Bob. That's a big question.
And we also know that the more equality there is, the more democracy there is. In other words, the fewer people that have money, which equates in our society to control, because especially with Citizens United, you can buy elections, the less democracy you have. And that's the whole thing. It's really that the more equal the playing field, the more the people are actually in a democratic state. And that's what that little article that you posted completely misses.
Well, see, I don't think it does. I think you equate, you jump very conveniently from money to power in Congress, okay? I don't think you could jump.
I'm saying that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely saying that.
Yeah, and listen, I think there is a lot of that right now, and you hear me rail about Congress, Republicans and Democrats all the time. So in that regard, I think we really have a broken system right now. There's no question. Let me ask you this. I've never asked you this question, I don't think. Do you think capitalism is wrong?
I think the excesses of capitalism are way wrong.
What are the excesses?
I mean, assuming profits at another person's expense, where another person gets hurt, and one person comes out smelling like a rose. But
see, here's the problem. I think that there's too much of that today, too much of that talk, because I think there are a lot of people who earn profits who then use them in the right way as well in this country. And the lie that's being visited on the American people is, if I happen to be successful in my life, if I happen to be doing okay, therefore I'm wrong and I'm doing it at the expense of someone else. And I don't believe that.
Well, the problem is that it's not that it's a fantasy, that a lot of people get injured when some people profit at their expense.
But there are a lot of people.
What you're saying is just because somebody's rich doesn't mean they've hurt people. I agree with that. But the actual reality is that it's a carnival atmosphere in which a lot of people are the shills and they're being taken. I mean, the marks. And
there are a lot of people
taken by those who are controlling the game.
But there are a lot of people who are benefiting from that as well because of job creation and so forth. I mean, and that's a whole other part of it that we need to talk about.
Look at the track record over the years.
We're actually out of time, Bob. I apologize. Give us a call on Friday. I want to talk more about this with you because I think it's something that deserves more time.
Gary, take care.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Welcome back to the Morning News on WSBA. I'm Gary Sutton.
And I'm Chris Tyler.
WSBA News Time is 8:59, and our words of wisdom today come from Ronald Reagan. And he talked about liberals, and he said this: the trouble with our liberal friends is that they're not ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Just a thought today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow on the Morning News, we're going to have Clark Hodges on to talk a little bit more about the economy and maybe some of the things that Congress is going through right now on their new budget deal. And also Ned Ryan later on with a big article on government. He's working in the trenches out there. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock here on WSBA.